It was a warm summer morning in Clearwater, Florida, when 8-year-old Jake Miller's laughter echoed through the colorful water slides of Waterworld. Little did anyone know that by sunset he would vanish without a trace, only to reappear 2 decades later as one of NASA's most promising astronauts. If this incredible story of loss and transformation moves you, please consider subscribing to support our channel. The sun beat down mercilessly on the sprawling water park, creating a shimmering mirage above the concrete walkways. Parents lounged under striped umbrellas, while children shrieked with delight as they splashed in the wave pools. Among them was Jake Miller, a skinny boy with tousled blonde hair and piercing blue eyes that sparkled with mischief and intelligence. "Mom, can I go on the Thunder Rapids again?" Jake tugged at his mother's sleeve, droplets of water cascading from his small shoulders. Lisa Miller looked up from her novel and smiled at her son. "That's your 3rd time, sweetie. Why don't you try the lazy river with your dad for a while?" Jake's face scrunched up in disappointment. "But that's for babies. I'm 8 now, remember?" Mark Miller chuckled, ruffling his son's wet hair. "Tell you what, champ, one more time on Thunder Rapids. Then we'll hit the snack bar for those nachos you like." Jake's face lit up instantly. "With extra cheese?" "Is there any other way?" Mark winked, watching as his son bounced excitedly on his heels. This was typical Jake, full of energy, always pushing boundaries, and completely incapable of hiding his emotions. His 3rd-grade teacher, Mrs. Gonzalez, often said he was the most enthusiastic student she'd ever taught, especially when it came to science. Just last month, his model of the solar system had won first prize at the school fair, despite being slightly lopsided because he'd insisted on making Pluto. "It will always be a planet to me, Dad." Jake was the kind of kid who collected rocks, not because they were pretty, but because he wanted to know their mineral composition. He devoured books about space and astronauts, and his bedroom ceiling was covered with glow-in-the-dark stars he'd meticulously arranged to match actual constellations. For his 8th birthday, his parents had taken him to the Kennedy Space Center, where he'd stood transfixed before the massive Saturn V rocket, whispering, "Someday I'll fly one of those." "Be careful, Jake," Lisa called after him as he darted toward the Thunder Rapids line, "and stay where we can see you." "I will," he called back, though his voice was already fading as he weaved through the crowd. The Millers were a typical middle-class family from Clearwater. Mark worked as an electrical engineer for a local manufacturing company, while Lisa taught kindergarten at Sunshine Elementary. They lived in a modest 3-bedroom house with a small backyard, where Jake would often set up his telescope on clear nights. Their neighborhood was the kind where children rode bikes until streetlights came on, where block parties happened every 4th of July, and where everyone knew everyone else's business, for better or worse. Jake was their only child, born after years of trying. Perhaps that's why they sometimes indulged him more than they should have, why they signed him up for every science camp and astronomy club, why they answered his endless questions about how things worked with patience rather than exasperation. "He's going to change the world someday," Mark would often say to Lisa as they watched their son sleep, his small chest rising and falling rhythmically, surrounded by books about space exploration and famous scientists. At school, Jake was well-liked, if not wildly popular. He had a small circle of friends who shared his interests, mainly Tyler Jenkins, whose family lived 2 doors down, and Sophia Chen, who could recite all the elements on the periodic table. They formed their own science squad, complete with handmade badges and a secret handshake that involved mimicking electron orbits. Jake's teachers noted his exceptional aptitude for mathematics and science, suggesting he might be gifted. But they also noted his occasional tendency to daydream, to stare out windows during history lessons as though his mind were somewhere far beyond the classroom walls. "He's not being disrespectful," Mrs. Gonzalez had explained during a parent-teacher conference. "He just processes information differently. When something captures his interest, he's all in, focused like a laser beam. When it doesn't," she'd shrugged, "it's like he's exploring other universes in his head." That summer morning at Waterworld was supposed to be a simple family outing, one of many during the long Florida summer break. The Millers had season passes, and they tried to visit at least once a week to escape the sweltering heat of their home, where the air conditioning unit was on its last legs. "I'll watch him from here," Lisa assured Mark as Jake disappeared into the crowd. "You can go grab us some drinks." Mark nodded, planting a quick kiss on his wife's cheek before heading toward the concession stands. It was a mundane moment, utterly forgettable under normal circumstances. Later, they would replay it in their minds thousands of times, wondering if things might have turned out differently had they made different choices. Lisa kept her eyes fixed on the entrance to Thunder Rapids, expecting to see Jake's blonde head emerge from the crowd at any moment. When 5 minutes passed, then 10, she felt the first flicker of concern. Jake was punctual to a fault, another quirk of his methodical mind. He'd promised to return after one ride, and Jake always kept his promises. Rising from her lounge chair, Lisa walked toward the water slide, scanning the lines of excited children. No Jake. She checked the exit area, thinking perhaps he'd gotten caught up watching others emerge from the slide's final splash. Still no Jake. "Excuse me," she asked a teenaged lifeguard with sun-bleached hair. "Have you seen a little boy, about this tall, blonde hair, blue swim trunks with rocket ships on them?" The lifeguard shook his head. "Sorry, ma'am, there are hundreds of kids here today." Lisa's heart began to beat faster as she worked her way through the nearby attractions, the wave pool, the kiddie splash pad, the restrooms. With each empty search, her movements became more frantic, her voice more strained as she called her son's name. By the time she ran into Mark returning with their drinks, her face was pale with fear. "I can't find him," she said, her voice cracking. "He never came back from Thunder Rapids." What followed was a blur of activity. The park's security team was notified, and an announcement crackled over the loudspeakers. "Attention, Waterworld guests, we're looking for Jake Miller, age 8, wearing blue swim trunks with rockets. If you see Jake, please bring him to the nearest staff member." The message repeated every few minutes as security guards and staff members combed the park. Mark retraced Jake's steps to Thunder Rapids, questioning every employee and many of the guests. Lisa remained near their original spot, hoping Jake would return on his own, perhaps having gotten distracted or lost track of time. But as minutes stretched into an hour, the Millers' worry crystallized into terror. This wasn't like Jake at all. He was responsible, aware of his surroundings, and knew exactly what to do if he got lost. Find a staff member and give them his parents' names and phone numbers. They'd practiced it many times. "Maybe he wandered into an employee area by mistake," suggested a security guard with a sympathetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We'll check everywhere." But Jake wasn't in any employee areas. He wasn't in the first aid station or the lost and found. He wasn't napping in a quiet corner or making friends with other children his age. Jake Miller had simply vanished. By mid-afternoon, the local police had arrived, and Waterworld had transformed from a place of carefree fun to the epicenter of a missing child investigation. Officers took statements from the Millers, park employees, and anyone who might have seen Jake. They reviewed security camera footage, which showed Jake entering Thunder Rapids but never exiting, a detail that sent ice through Lisa's veins. "Could he have drowned?" she whispered to Officer Ramirez, a stocky woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "We've checked all the pools and water features," Ramirez assured her. "There's no indication of that. Besides, these places have safeguards, lifeguards, barriers, alarms. If a child were in distress in the water, someone would notice." As the day wore on, more police arrived, along with canine units, whose German shepherds sniffed Jake's T-shirt and then methodically worked their way through the park. Local news vans gathered at the entrance, and reporters with solemn expressions delivered updates to cameras, Jake's school photo displayed in the corner of the screen. "We're doing everything possible to locate 8-year-old Jake Miller, who disappeared from Waterworld approximately 5 hours ago," said Police Chief Daniels during a hastily arranged press conference. We ask anyone with information to come forward immediately. The search expanded beyond the water park to the surrounding areas, parking lots, nearby businesses, wooded areas, and drainage ditches. Volunteers from the community joined in, forming search parties that combed through underbrush and called Jake's name until their voices grew hoarse. As night fell, the water park stood empty except for police officers and crime scene technicians working under portable lights. Lisa and Mark sat huddled together on a bench near the park's entrance, refusing to leave, despite gentle suggestions from officers that they should go home and rest. "He might come back here looking for us," Lisa insisted, her eyes red-rimmed and vacant. "We can't leave." Mark, normally so steady and practical, seemed to have aged a decade in a single day. His shoulders slumped under an invisible weight as he stared at the phone in his hand, willing it to ring with news of his son. That first night was only the beginning of what would become a nightmare without end. In the days that followed, Jake's disappearance became national news. His face appeared on television screens across America. His story featured on true crime shows and discussed by panels of experts who offered theories ranging from accidental drowning to abduction. The investigation revealed that Jake had last been seen near a maintenance area behind Thunder Rapids, a section of the park not meant for guests. Security camera footage showed him pausing near a door marked "Employees Only," his attention caught by something off camera. Then he moved out of frame, and no other cameras captured him after that moment. What would have drawn him there? Detective James Reed asked during an interview with the Millers 3 days after the disappearance. Reed was a veteran of the Clearwater Police Department's Missing Persons Unit, with piercing blue eyes and a reputation for never giving up on a case. "He was always curious about how things worked," Mark explained, his voice hollow. "If he heard a strange sound or saw something unusual, he would want to investigate." "Like what?" Reed pressed. Lisa closed her eyes, trying to channel her son's thought process. Machinery, pumps, anything mechanical or scientific. If he thought he could learn something new. Her voice trailed off. The maintenance area was thoroughly searched. Every closet, crawl space, and storage container examined for any sign of Jake. Employees were questioned, their backgrounds checked. Medium-low pitch, clear and confident delivery at 180 WPM. Maintain a suspenseful and serious tone, but keep the pacing smooth and natural. Avoid over-enunciating or drawing out words. Use light, natural pauses at commas, slightly longer at periods. For quoted dialogue, shift to a more conversational tone, appropriate to each character. Keep the narration compelling, focused, and immersive from beginning to end. The entire water circulation system was shut down and inspected to rule out the unthinkable. Nothing. No Jake. No clues. No explanation for how a bright, careful 8-year-old boy could simply disappear from a crowded water park in broad daylight. Weeks passed, then months. The media attention gradually waned, though Jake's case was featured periodically on shows like America's Missing Children and Unsolved Mysteries. The Millers established a foundation in Jake's name, offering rewards for information and funding search efforts for other missing children. But as the first anniversary of Jake's disappearance approached, even Detective Reed had to admit they were no closer to answers than they had been on day one. "We haven't given up," he assured the Millers during one of his regular visits to their home. "We never will. But I want you to prepare yourselves for the possibility that we may never know exactly what happened that day." Lisa nodded mechanically, having heard similar warnings before. But in her heart, she refused to accept them. Jake was out there somewhere. She could feel it with the same certainty she'd felt his first kicks during pregnancy. A mother knows. 5 years after the disappearance, the Millers still lived in the same house, though they'd converted Jake's bedroom into a home office where they coordinated efforts for their foundation.
His telescope remained in the backyard, covered but ready, as though Jake might return any night to resume his stargazing. 10 years after, they divorced, not due to blame or lack of love, but because grief had hollowed them out until they were merely shells occupying the same space, unable to help each other heal. 15 years after, Mark moved to Arizona to be near his sister, while Lisa remained in Clearwater, teaching kindergarten and volunteering with search organizations. The police file on Jake remained open, but inactive, gathering dust in the department's archives. 20 years after Jake Miller disappeared from Waterworld, the case had become a footnote in local history, a tragedy remembered mainly by longtime residents and true crime enthusiasts who occasionally debated it on internet forums. And then, on a rainy Tuesday in April, Lisa Miller climbed into her attic to store some old teaching materials and noticed a cardboard box she hadn't opened in years. Across the top, in Mark's precise handwriting, was written, "Jake, Keepsakes." With trembling hands, Lisa pulled the box toward her and lifted the lid. Inside were the artifacts of her son's brief life: report cards, artwork, birthday cards, the blue ribbon from his solar system project. She ran her fingers over these treasures, remembering the boy who had created them, the boy whose absence had defined the second half of her life. At the bottom of the box, partially hidden beneath a folded T-shirt, was a small envelope she didn't recognize. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper with childish handwriting. "I'm okay. I hope you find me someday." Lisa stared at the note, her mind racing. Had this been in the box all along? Had she somehow missed it during previous examinations of Jake's belongings, or was it something else entirely, something impossible? The handwriting was unmistakably Jake's, but the implication was earth-shattering. If Jake had written this note, it meant he had survived whatever happened at Waterworld. It meant he might still be alive. With hands shaking so badly she could barely operate her phone, Lisa called Detective James Reed, now nearing retirement, but still haunted by the cases he couldn't solve, Jake's foremost among them. "I need you to see something," she said when he answered. "It's about Jake."
But what they were about to discover would shake the foundations of everything they thought they knew about that fateful summer day 2 decades ago, and set in motion a chain of events that would lead to one of the most astonishing revelations in the history of missing persons cases. The discovery of Jake's note sent shockwaves through the small circle of people who had never forgotten the boy who disappeared at Waterworld. Detective James Reed, his blonde hair now streaked with gray, arrived at Lisa's house less than 30 minutes after her call, his weathered face betraying both skepticism and hope. "May I?" he asked, holding out his hand for the note. Lisa relinquished it reluctantly, watching as Reed examined the paper, turning it over and holding it up to the light. "We should have this analyzed," he said finally. "Handwriting, paper composition, age of the ink, anything that might tell us when it was written." "It's Jake's handwriting," Lisa insisted. "I'd know it anywhere." Reed nodded. "I believe you. But if this note was written after his disappearance, we need to establish when and how it got into this box." The note was carefully placed in an evidence bag and sent to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement's forensic lab. Meanwhile, Reed officially reopened the case, pulling the dusty files from storage and reviewing every detail with fresh eyes. "Technology has advanced significantly in 20 years, he explained to Lisa over coffee in her kitchen the next morning. "Facial recognition software, DNA techniques, digital archives, we have tools now that weren't available during the original investigation." Lisa nodded absently, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "Do you think he's still alive, James?" Reed hesitated. After 2 decades in law enforcement, he'd learned to temper expectations. But the note changed everything. "I think we need to proceed as if he is. That's our best-case scenario."
The investigation gained momentum quickly. News of the reopened case spread through local media, then national outlets. The story of a mother finding a mysterious note from her long-missing son captivated the public imagination, and tips began pouring in from across the country. Most were dead ends, well-meaning but misguided reports of men in their late 20s who bore some resemblance to what Jake might look like now. Reed and his team investigated each one methodically, collecting DNA samples when possible and comparing them to the Miller family's genetic profiles. 3 weeks after the discovery of the note, the forensic analysis came back. The paper and ink were consistent with materials available 20 years ago, and handwriting experts confirmed it matched samples of Jake's writing from before his disappearance. Most significantly, there were trace amounts of chlorine on the paper, the kind used in swimming pools. So it was written around the time he disappeared, Lisa concluded, her hope dimming slightly. Not after. Not necessarily, Reed countered. The chlorine suggests it was written at or near the water park, but it doesn't tell us exactly when. Jake could have written it days or even weeks after his disappearance, if he still had access to chlorinated water. The implication hung in the air between them. If Jake had written the note after vanishing, it meant his disappearance might not have been random or opportunistic. It might have been planned. This possibility led investigators back to Waterworld, which had changed ownership twice since Jake's disappearance, but still operated under the same name. The current management cooperated fully, providing access to maintenance records dating back 20 years and allowing engineers to examine the facility's infrastructure.
The area where Jake was last seen had been remodeled, but original blueprints showed a network of maintenance tunnels beneath that section of the park, tunnels used for accessing pumps, filters, and electrical systems. Could Jake have somehow entered those tunnels? And if so, where would they have led him? As this aspect of the investigation unfolded, another unexpected lead emerged. Tyler Jenkins, Jake's childhood friend who had been part of their science squad, saw a news report about the reopened case and contacted Detective Reed. "I think I might have seen him," Tyler said during their meeting at the police station. Now a high school physics teacher, Tyler had the same earnest expression he'd had as a child, though he'd grown into a tall, lanky man with glasses and a receding hairline. "Recently?" Reed asked, leaning forward. Tyler shook his head. "No, years ago. I never said anything because it seemed so impossible, but with the case reopened, I can't keep it to myself anymore." He explained that about 5 years after Jake's disappearance, when they were both around 13, he had attended a regional science fair in Orlando with his middle school. Among the competitors from other schools was a boy who looked remarkably like Jake, older, of course, but with the same distinctive features and mannerisms. He even had the same way of tilting his head when he was thinking hard about something, Tyler recalled. But his name was different, William, I think, and he was with another family. I tried to approach him, but he didn't seem to recognize me. I told myself I was just seeing what I wanted to see. "Do you remember his last name, the school he represented?" Reed pressed. Tyler shook his head. "It was a private school, I remember that much, and his project was about propulsion systems, something way beyond what most kids our age were doing. He won first place." This new information sent investigators searching through records of regional science fairs from 15 years ago. After days of combing through archived programs and newspaper articles, they found what they were looking for. A photograph from the Central Florida Science Exposition showing a boy identified as William Carter receiving a first-place trophy for his project, Efficient Propulsion Systems for Extended Space Travel. The black and white newspaper photo was grainy, but there was enough detail to warrant further investigation. Reed arranged for the image to be enhanced and analyzed, comparing it with age progression renderings of what Jake might have looked like at 13. "There's a 78% match in facial structure," the forensic analyst reported. "That's significant, but not conclusive." Reed stared at the two images side by side, the smiling 8-year-old Jake and the serious 13-year-old William. There were differences, certainly, but also striking similarities. The shape of the eyes, the set of the jaw,
the way one eyebrow arched slightly higher than the other. We need to find William Carter, Reed decided. If he was participating in science fairs 15 years ago, there must be records, school registrations, competition entries, something that can tell us where he went next. The search for William Carter became the investigation's new focus. Records showed he had attended Oak Ridge Academy, an exclusive private school in Orlando known for its rigorous science and mathematics curriculum. But attempts to access his student records were met with resistance from school administrators, citing privacy laws. It took a court order to finally obtain the information they sought. William Carter had been enrolled at Oak Ridge for 3 years, from ages 12 to 15, before transferring to Phillips Exeter Academy in New Hampshire, one of the most prestigious preparatory schools in the country. His academic record was exemplary, with particular strengths in physics, astronomy, and advanced mathematics.
Most intriguingly, William had been registered by guardians named Robert and Eleanor Carter, who listed their occupation as consultants and provided a residential address in an affluent Orlando suburb. When investigators visited the address, they found it had been sold 14 years ago, and the Carters had left no forwarding information. "It's like they disappeared into thin air," Reed reported to Lisa during one of their regular updates. "No property records, no tax returns, nothing in any database we can access. It's as if they existed just long enough to get William through those critical years, then vanished." "Or changed identities again," Lisa suggested, her mind racing with possibilities. "If they took Jake and renamed him once, what's to stop them from doing it again?" The theory that Jake had been abducted and given a new identity as William Carter gained credibility as more details emerged. Records from Phillips Exeter showed William had graduated with honors and earned a full scholarship to MIT, where he studied aerospace engineering. From there, the trail led to graduate studies at Stanford, followed by a position at a private space technology firm in Houston. And then, a breakthrough that left even the seasoned Detective Reed speechless. A photograph in an aerospace industry magazine showing a team of engineers and scientists at a rocket launch. Among them, identified in the caption as Dr. William Carter, propulsion specialist, was a man in his early 30s with familiar blue eyes and a serious expression. "It's him," Lisa whispered when Reed showed her the magazine. "It's Jake. He has my father's eyes, Mark's jawline." Her voice broke as she traced the outline of the man's face with a trembling finger. Reed nodded slowly. "There's more. Dr. William Carter works for Aerospace Dynamics, a major NASA contractor, and according to their website, he's part of the team developing propulsion systems for the Artemis program, NASA's plan to return humans to the moon and eventually send them to Mars." The implications were staggering. If William Carter was indeed Jake Miller, it meant he had been living an entirely different life for 20 years, a life of extraordinary achievement and scientific contribution. It meant someone had taken an 8-year-old boy from a water park and, instead of harming him, had somehow channeled his natural intelligence and curiosity into a path that led to the stars. But why? And who? And most importantly, did William Carter know he had once been Jake Miller? As these questions swirled, Reed and his team worked to establish surveillance on Dr. Carter without alerting him to their interest. They learned he lived alone in a modern apartment near the Johnson Space Center, drove a modest sedan, and spent most of his time either at work or at home. He had few visitors and appeared to lead a solitary, work-focused life. "We need a DNA sample," Reed explained to Lisa, "something that would stand up in court. Without that, we're just speculating based on resemblances and coincidences." Obtaining that sample proved challenging. Dr. Carter rarely ate at restaurants where he might leave behind utensils or glasses. He didn't smoke. He brought his own water bottle to the gym. It was almost as if he was deliberately avoiding leaving DNA traces, or perhaps it was simply the careful habits of a methodical scientist. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Sophia Chen, the third member of Jake's childhood science squad, had gone on to become a molecular biologist at Johns Hopkins.
When she learned about the investigation from Tyler, she offered her expertise. NASA publishes research papers by their scientists and contractors, she explained during a video call with Reed and Lisa. Many of these include biological experiments that would require control samples from the researchers themselves. If Dr.
Carter has published anything involving human cellular material, those samples might still exist in research repositories. It was a long shot, but it paid off. 3 years earlier, Dr. Carter had contributed to a study on the effects of microgravity on human cell regeneration. His own cells had served as one of the control samples, and those samples were still stored at a research facility in Maryland, a facility where Sophia had colleagues. With proper warrants and ethical clearances, a sample of William Carter's cells was compared to DNA from both Lisa and Mark Miller. The results, when they finally came, were unequivocal. William Carter was, with 99.9997% certainty, the biological son of Lisa and Mark Miller. He was Jake. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation team. After 20 years, they had found the boy who disappeared at Waterworld, not as a victim of violence or tragedy, but as one of the nation's most brilliant aerospace engineers, a man whose work might someday help send humans to Mars. But before they could celebrate this extraordinary outcome, they needed answers to the many questions that remained. Who had taken Jake? How had he become William? And perhaps most importantly, what did William Carter know about his true identity? The team debated how to approach him. A direct confrontation might cause him to flee or deny everything. Legal proceedings could become messy and public, potentially derailing his career and causing unnecessary trauma. In the end, they decided on a more measured approach. Detective Reed would reach out to Dr. Carter professionally, requesting a meeting to discuss a matter of personal importance without revealing the true nature of their investigation. Meanwhile, they would continue gathering information about the Carters, the couple who had raised William from age 8 to 15 before seemingly disappearing from his life. As they prepared for this crucial next step, none of them could have anticipated the series of events that would unfold, events that would reveal a story even more extraordinary than they had imagined. The bland conference room at the Houston Police Department's Central Division buzzed with nervous energy as Detective James Reed straightened his tie for the 5th time. Beside him, Lisa Miller sat perfectly still, her hands folded on the table, her eyes fixed on the door through which her son, a stranger who didn't know he was her son, would soon walk. "Remember," Reed said quietly, "we agreed to take this slowly. Let me establish the parameters of the conversation before we reveal too much." Lisa nodded, though her entire body seemed to vibrate with the effort of containing her emotions. 20 years of grief, hope, and uncertainty had led to this moment. In minutes, she would be face to face with Jake, now Dr. William Carter, for the first time since that summer day at Waterworld. The door opened, and a tall man in a navy suit entered, followed by a woman Reed recognized as Diane Frazier, a high-profile attorney known for handling sensitive cases involving public figures. Dr. Carter's presence was immediately commanding, not through any deliberate attempt at authority, but through the focused intensity that seemed to radiate from him. His blonde hair was cut short and professional, with strands of premature gray at the temples. Behind rimless glasses, his blue eyes, Lisa's father's eyes, surveyed the room with analytical precision. "Detective Reed?" he said, extending his hand. His voice was deeper than Lisa had imagined, with a slight, unplaceable accent. "I'm William Carter. This is my attorney, Miss Frazier." Reed shook his hand, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact. "Thank you for coming, Dr. Carter. This is Lisa Miller, who has a personal interest in our discussion today." William turned to Lisa, and for a heart-stopping moment, she searched his face for any flicker of recognition. There was none, only polite curiosity as he shook her hand briefly before taking a seat across the table. "Your message mentioned a matter of personal importance," Williams said, addressing Reed. "Given its apparently sensitive nature, I thought it prudent to bring counsel. I hope that doesn't complicate things." "Not at all," Reed assured him, though in truth the attorney's presence would require a more careful approach. "Dr. Carter, I'll be direct. We're investigating a cold case from 20 years ago, the disappearance of a child named Jake Miller from a water park in Clearwater, Florida." Williams' expression remained neutral. "I'm not familiar with that case. How does it involve me?" Reed slid a folder across the table. "These are photographs of Jake Miller, taken shortly before his disappearance. And these." He placed another set of photos alongside them. "These are your school photographs from Oak Ridge Academy, beginning at age 12. William glanced at the images without touching them, his face betraying nothing. "I see a superficial resemblance, certainly, but I fail to understand the connection you're suggesting." "We have DNA evidence, Dr. Carter." Reed kept his tone gentle but firm. "Jake Miller's parents provided samples, as did you, unknowingly, through your research work with NASA. The match is conclusive. You are Jake Miller." A long silence filled the room. William's attorney placed a restraining hand on his arm, but he seemed not to notice, his eyes fixed on the photographs before him. "That's impossible," he said finally, his voice perfectly controlled. "I grew up in Seattle with my parents, Robert and Eleanor Carter. We moved to Orlando when I was 12 because of my father's work in aerospace engineering. There must be some mistake in your testing." Lisa couldn't contain herself any longer. "There's no mistake, Jake. You're my son. You disappeared from Waterworld when you were 8 years old. We've been looking for you ever since." William's eyes met hers, and for the briefest moment something flickered behind them. Confusion, perhaps, or the faintest echo of recognition. But it was quickly replaced by a cool, scientific detachment. "Miss Miller, I sympathize with your loss, but I have clear memories of my childhood in Seattle. I attended Lakeside Elementary. I had a dog named Kepler. My mother taught mathematics at the university. These aren't false memories." His attorney intervened. "Detective, my client has cooperated fully, but these claims are extraordinary and potentially damaging to his reputation and career. If you have actual evidence beyond disputed DNA results, now would be the time to present it." Reed nodded, having anticipated this response. "We understand this is difficult to process, Dr. Carter, but we've done extensive background research. There are no school records for William Carter at Lakeside Elementary or any other Seattle school. The first official documentation of your existence appears when you enrolled at Oak Ridge Academy at age 12. He slid another document across the table, a copy of the note found in Lisa's attic. This was written by Jake Miller, either shortly before or after his disappearance. The handwriting matches samples from his school assignments, and there are traces of chlorine consistent with the water park environment. William stared at the note, his composure finally cracking slightly. He reached out and touched the paper with a scientist's careful precision. "I'm okay. I hope you find me someday," he read aloud. Something passed across his face, a shadow of memory, perhaps, or simply the natural empathy of one human being for another's pain. "Dr. Carter," Reed said gently, "we believe you were taken from that water park and given a new identity. The people you knew as Robert and Eleanor Carter disappeared from all records after you went to Phillips Exeter. They never visited you there, according to the school's logs. They never attended your graduation from MIT or any of your other academic achievements." William's jaw tightened. "My parents were private people. They valued independence. We grew apart as I got older." "Or they were never your parents at all," Lisa suggested, her voice breaking. "They were people who took you for some reason we don't yet understand. The room fell silent again as William seemed to struggle with the implications. His attorney whispered something in his ear, but he shook his head slightly. "I have memories," he insisted, though with less certainty than before. "Clear memories of my childhood. Seattle, our house on Maple Street, the view of Mount Rainier from my bedroom window." Reed nodded sympathetically. "Memory is complex, especially childhood memory. It can be influenced, shaped, even created. We'd like you to consider the possibility that what you remember isn't what actually happened." William removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, a gesture so reminiscent of Mark Miller that Lisa had to stifle a gasp. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, more reflective. "What exactly are you asking of me? To accept that my entire life history is a fabrication? That the people I called my parents were, what, kidnappers? Child traffickers?" He replaced his glasses, his scientific mind visibly grappling with an impossible equation. "And if what you're suggesting is true, what happens next? Do I cease to be William Carter? Do I become this Jake Miller, a person I don't remember being?" Lisa leaned forward, unable to resist the maternal instinct to comfort him, despite the decades and mysteries between them. "We're not asking you to give up who you are now. We just want to understand what happened. And yes, selfishly, I want to know my son again, the man he became." William studied her face, perhaps seeing for the first time the echoes of his own features reflected there. "I need time," he said finally, "and I need proof beyond DNA tests and missing records. If what you're saying is true, there would be inconsistencies in my memories, gaps, things that don't align with documented reality." Reed nodded. "We can work with that. Would you be willing to undergo hypnotherapy with a specialist in recovered memories, and to allow us to investigate the Carters more thoroughly?" After a whispered consultation with his attorney, William agreed to both proposals, with certain conditions regarding his privacy and professional standing. The meeting concluded with a tentative plan for further communication, and William left without another word to Lisa, though he did glance back at her once, his expression unreadable. As the door closed behind him, Lisa finally allowed her tears to fall. "He doesn't remember me at all," she whispered. Reed squeezed her shoulder gently. "Give him time. This is a lot to process. The important thing is that he's alive, he's successful, and he's willing to explore the possibility. That's more than we had yesterday." Over the next several weeks, the investigation into William Carter's past and the identities of Robert and Eleanor Carter intensified. Record searches extended internationally, following the theory that the couple might have used foreign credentials to establish their American identities. Meanwhile, William agreed to sessions with Dr. Elena Vasquez, a psychologist specializing in trauma and memory recovery. These sessions were private, but William permitted Dr. Vasquez to share relevant findings with Detective Reed. "He's experiencing significant cognitive dissonance," Dr. Vasquez reported after their third session. "His memories of Seattle are detailed, but generic, the kind of details anyone might know about the city from books or media. When I ask for specific personal memories, the name of a teacher, a friend's phone number, the layout of his childhood home, he becomes frustrated because he can't recall them."
"Is that unusual?" Reed asked. "For normal childhood memories, yes. We typically remember emotional anchors, a particularly kind teacher, a best friend's birthday party, the smell of our mother's cooking. William's memories lack these emotional connections. They feel constructed." The breakthrough came during their fifth session, when Dr. Vasquez used a guided visualization technique to help William explore his earliest memories. Under light hypnosis, he described not Seattle, but a water slide, the rush of water, the echo of laughter, the smell of chlorine and sunscreen. "There was a door," he said, his voice distant and childlike, "behind the big pipes. It made a funny noise, like something was stuck. I wanted to see if I could fix it." When he emerged from hypnosis, William was shaken. "That wasn't a memory of Seattle," he said.
something else, somewhere else. Dr. Vasquez nodded. It matches the description of Waterworld where Jake Miller disappeared, the maintenance area near Thunder Rapids. William's scientific mind couldn't dismiss the evidence mounting before him. If I am this Jake Miller, then who were the Carters, and why would they take me only to provide me with education and opportunities? That question drove the next phase of the investigation. Reed's team, working with FBI resources, traced a pattern of large withdrawals from offshore accounts in the months before Jake's disappearance and the appearance of the Carters in Orlando. The accounts were linked to a shell corporation called Prometheus Educational Investments. Further investigation revealed that Prometheus had funded several gifted student programs across the country, all with a focus on advanced sciences and potential aerospace applications. Most significantly, the corporation had been established by a former NASA scientist named Dr. Howard Grayson, who had left the agency under a cloud of controversy in the early 1990s. Grayson had been brilliant but ethically flexible, advocating for accelerated space exploration programs regardless of cost or conventional constraints. After leaving NASA, he had disappeared from public view until a property record placed him in Clearwater, Florida in the same time period as Jake's disappearance. "We think Grayson was behind it all," Reed explained to William during a meeting at his Houston apartment. "He created Prometheus as a private initiative to identify and cultivate scientific talent outside normal educational channels. Normal channels would have ethical oversight, restrictions on how intensively children could be trained." William listened with growing comprehension. "You're suggesting he selected me? Based on what? I was just an ordinary child with an interest in space." Lisa, who had been invited to join the meeting at William's cautious request, shook her head. "You were never ordinary, Jake. Your preschool teachers said you were doing multiplication when other kids were learning to count to 20. You built a working model solar system when you were 6. You memorized the names of Jupiter's moons just for fun. We found records of you attending a space camp the summer before your disappearance," Reed added. "Grayson was a guest lecturer there. We think that's where he first noticed you." William paced his living room, the walls of which were covered with framed photographs of rocket launches and celestial phenomena, but notably devoid of personal photos. "So this Grayson identified me as having potential, and then what? Orchestrated my abduction? Created an entirely new identity for me? That's monstrous." "We think Robert and Eleanor Carter were his associates," Reed continued, "possibly former academics or scientists themselves. They were tasked with raising you in an environment that would maximize your intellectual development, with a specific focus on aerospace engineering, Grayson's passion." "But why not approach my parents legally?" William demanded, glancing at Lisa. "Why not offer scholarships, mentorship, legitimate opportunities?" Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "We would have supported any opportunity that helped you grow. We never wanted to hold you back." The room fell silent as William absorbed this. "Where is Grayson now?" "Dead," Reed replied. "He died 3 years ago in a private facility in Switzerland. Pancreatic cancer. The Carters seem to have disappeared around the same time, which supports our theory that they were working for him." William sank into a chair, his face pale. "So the architect of my abduction is beyond justice, and the people who raised me, whether they were complicit or merely following orders, are gone as well." "We're still looking for them," Reed assured him. "But yes, it seems they covered their tracks very effectively." William looked up at Lisa, really seeing her for perhaps the first time since their reunion. "And you never stopped looking for me." Lisa shook her head, unable to speak through her tears. 20 years, William murmured. "An entire lifetime." He rose and walked to his bookshelf, returning with a small wooden box. From it he removed a smooth stone, ordinary except for the faint fossil imprint on its surface. "I've carried this with me since I was 12, he said, turning it over in his palm. "The Carters, or whoever they were, told me I'd always had it, that I'd found it on a beach in Washington when I was 6. I never questioned why it was so important to me." He held it out to Lisa. "Does this mean anything to you?" Lisa took the stone with trembling hands. "We found this at Clearwater Beach. You were so excited. You said it was proof that Earth had been underwater millions of years ago. You kept it on your nightstand." William's scientific composure finally cracked. He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking slightly. "Then it's all true. My life, William Carter's life, began with a crime, with trauma I don't even remember." Lisa moved to him hesitantly, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Your life began when I held you for the first time in Clearwater General Hospital. Whatever happened after, whatever they did, they couldn't change who you are at your core." William looked up at her, his eyes red-rimmed but clear. "And who am I? Jake Miller? William Carter? Some hybrid of both?" "You're the boy who loved the stars," Lisa said simply. "The boy who asked questions no one could answer. The man who might help humanity reach Mars. The name doesn't matter." Something shifted in William's expression. A softening, a recognition. "I have. Fragments. Not memories exactly, but feelings. A sense of safety I associated with the Carters. But perhaps it wasn't them at all. Perhaps it was—" Lisa nodded, hope blossoming in her chest. "You were loved, Jake. So deeply loved." The next morning, a press release from the Clearwater Police Department announced the resolution of a 20-year-old missing child case. Jake Miller, who had disappeared from Waterworld in 2003, had been located alive and well. The statement was deliberately vague about the circumstances, noting only that Mr. Miller was given a different identity and raised outside of Florida, and that the investigation into those responsible continues. What the press release didn't mention was the private agreement reached between William Carter and the Miller family. William would continue his work with NASA under his established name, the name associated with his degrees, publications, and professional reputation. But he would also begin the process of reconnecting with his biological parents and learning about the life that had been taken from him. 3 days after the press conference, as media speculation reached fever pitch, NASA made its own announcement. William Carter had been selected as a mission specialist for an upcoming International Space Station rotation, with potential involvement in the Artemis lunar program to follow. The timing was not coincidental. William had decided that the best way forward was not to hide from his extraordinary story, but to use it as a platform, to advocate for missing children, to support scientific education, and, perhaps most importantly, to reclaim the narrative of his own life. "I was taken from a water park at age 8, he said during his first public statement, Lisa and Mark Miller standing supportively behind him. "Through circumstances I'm still coming to understand, I was given opportunities that shaped me into the scientist I am today. But those opportunities came at an immeasurable cost, to me, and to the family that never stopped searching for me." He paused, his composure perfect except for the slight tremor in his right hand, a tremor only Lisa noticed because she remembered it from when he was nervous about school presentations as a child. "I don't condone what was done to me, regardless of the intentions behind it. No child should be separated from their family to fulfill someone else's vision, no matter how lofty that vision might be. But I also can't deny that the path I was placed on led me to work I find deeply meaningful, work that might, in some small way, advance our understanding of our place in the cosmos." The press conference concluded with William addressing the question everyone wanted answered. How did he feel about discovering his true identity after 20 years?
"I'm still processing that," he admitted. "I have two sets of parents, the Millers, who gave me life and loved me for my first 8 years, and the Carters, who raised me from age 8 to adulthood. One pair lost me through a terrible crime. The other pair may have been complicit in that crime. I'm not sure what forgiveness looks like in this situation, or even if forgiveness is the right framework." He glanced at Lisa before continuing. "What I do know is that the night sky I fell in love with as a child in Clearwater is the same sky I've dedicated my career to exploring. That continuity gives me hope that I can integrate these two halves of my life into something whole and authentic." In the months that followed, William began the delicate process of reconnecting with his past. He visited the Miller home in Clearwater, where Lisa had preserved many of his childhood possessions. He met with Tyler and Sophia, his former science squad friends, marveling at the parallel paths that had led all three of them into scientific careers. Most poignantly, he visited Waterworld, now renovated and under new management, after hours, when the park was empty. Standing before the spot where Thunder Rapids had once stood, now replaced by a more modern attraction, he tried to access memories of that fateful day. Nothing came, but he felt a strange sense of peace nonetheless. "I think part of me always knew something wasn't right," he confided to Lisa as they walked the perimeter of the park. "I had these dreams, recurring dreams about water and darkness, and a voice calling a name I couldn't quite hear." Lisa squeezed his hand. "You're hearing it now." William, who had begun, in private moments, to think of himself as both William and Jake, nodded. "It's strange. I still feel like William Carter. I still think like him, work like him, have his memories and accomplishments. But now there's this additional dimension. This awareness that before William there was Jake, and Jake had a family who never stopped looking for him." The full truth about Howard Grayson and his Prometheus project emerged gradually through continued investigation.
Journals found in his Swiss residence revealed a man obsessed with accelerating humanity's journey to the stars, convinced that conventional educational systems were failing to identify and nurture the specific talents needed for interplanetary exploration. "Traditional methods waste precious years," he had written. "By the time we identify exceptional minds, they're already half-formed, constrained by conventional thinking. We need to intervene earlier, create optimal conditions for development from the beginning." Grayson had apparently identified several candidates at various space camps and science competitions across the country. Jake Miller had been the first, and as far as investigators could determine, the only child actually taken from his family. Whether the experiment's apparent success had satisfied Grayson, or whether ethical qualms had prevented further abductions, remained unclear. What was clear, however, was that Grayson had created an elaborate support system for his project. The Carters, whose real identities remained a mystery, had been carefully selected and trained to provide the specific educational and psychological environment Grayson believed would cultivate aerospace genius. The move from Seattle, a fabricated history, to Orlando had been strategic, placing young William near NASA's Kennedy Space Center for easy access to educational opportunities and mentorship from Grayson's former colleagues. Most disturbing was the evidence of memory manipulation. Grayson's journals referenced cognitive restructuring techniques and narrative implantation, suggesting that Jake's memories of his early life had been deliberately suppressed and replaced with the fictional Seattle childhood. For William, this revelation was perhaps the most difficult to accept. "My memories were engineered," he said during a private session with Dr. Vasquez. "The foundations of my identity were constructed by someone else for their own purposes." "Not all of them," Dr. Vasquez reminded him gently. "Your passion for space, your intellectual curiosity, your analytical mind, those were inherently yours. Grayson may have recognized those qualities and attempted to channel them, but he didn't create them." This distinction became William's lifeline as he navigated the complex process of integrating his past and present. He began keeping a journal, recording fragments of memory as they surfaced, a process Dr. Vasquez had suggested might help bridge the gap between Jake and William. Most entries were brief flashes, the feel of a telescope's focus knob under his small fingers, the taste of his mother's blueberry pancakes, the sound of his father's laugh. But occasionally, more substantive memories emerged. I remember a birthday party, my 8th, I think. There was a cake shaped like Saturn with rings made of frosting. Someone, my father, had hidden small toy astronauts around the rings. I was so excited I could barely blow out the candles. Lisa confirmed these details, showing him photographs of that very cake with little Jake beaming beside it. Each such confirmation was both painful and healing, evidence of the life that had been taken from him, but also proof that parts of Jake still existed within William. 6 months after the initial revelation, William made a decision that surprised everyone. He legally changed his name to William Jacob Carter Miller. It's unwieldy on scientific papers, he admitted with a small smile, but it feels right. It acknowledges both parts of who I am. As his NASA training intensified in preparation for his space station mission, William found himself drawing on both aspects of his identity. The disciplined, analytical mind of William Carter enabled him to master the technical demands of spaceflight, while the rediscovered curiosity and wonder of Jake Miller fueled his excitement about actually seeing Earth from orbit. I used to lie in my backyard in Clearwater, looking up at the stars and imagining what it would be like to be among them, he told Lisa during one of their weekly video calls. Now, I'm going to find out. It's like a dream I've had for 30 years, longer than I even knew I'd been dreaming it. The day William launched into space aboard the Falcon rocket, Lisa and Mark Miller watched from the family viewing area at Kennedy Space Center, a privilege extended to all astronauts' families. As the massive rocket rose on a column of flame, Lisa clutched the small fossil-bearing stone that had traveled with her son through 2 lifetimes. "He made it," she whispered as the rocket disappeared into the blue. "Our boy made it to the stars." From his seat in the capsule, experiencing the crushing force of acceleration, William closed his eyes briefly. Behind his eyelids, he saw not the complex equations and procedures he had memorized as William Carter, but a simple image from Jake Miller's childhood, a crayon drawing of a rocket ship with a small, smiling stick figure waving from a round window. "I'm here," he thought, to both the boy he had been and the man he had become. We made it. 3 months later, during a scheduled video communication from the International Space Station, William floated before the camera with Earth's blue curve visible through the window behind him. He had been asked to share his unique perspective, not just as an astronaut seeing Earth from space, but as someone whose own life story defied conventional understanding. "From up here, the artificial boundaries we create seem very small," he said, his voice clear despite traveling thousands of miles from orbit to the eager ears of viewers worldwide. "National borders, cultural divisions, even the lines we draw between different parts of our own lives, they fade when you see the whole Earth as one interconnected system." He gestured toward the window, where sunrise was just beginning to illuminate the planet's edge. "I've been thinking a lot about identity during my time here. 20 years ago, I was taken from a water park and given a new name, a new history, a new purpose. For 2 decades, I was William Carter with no knowledge of Jake Miller. Now, I'm both, or perhaps someone new entirely, shaped by the integration of these 2 lives." The camera caught the thoughtful expression on his face as he continued. "I've realized that what happened to me, while extreme and criminal, is actually a magnified version of what happens to all of us. We are, in some sense, abducted from our original selves by circumstances, choices, relationships, and random events. We all create narratives to make sense of our lives, even when those narratives are incomplete or partially invented." He paused, watching the sunrise progress across Earth's surface. The difference is that most people get to be the primary authors of their own stories. Mine was written by others for a critical chapter. But now I'm reclaiming that authorship, integrating all the fragments into something authentic and whole. As the transmission concluded and William returned to his duties aboard the space station, Lisa Miller sat in her living room in Clearwater, surrounded by photographs. Jake at 7, proudly holding his science fair ribbon. William at 39, in his NASA uniform. And now, new images of her son floating in orbit, fulfilling a dream that had begun in a small Florida backyard 3 decades earlier. The story of Jake Miller and William Carter captured the public imagination in a way few missing persons cases ever had. It challenged conventional narratives about abduction and trauma, about identity and purpose, about loss and redemption. It raised difficult questions about the ethics of exceptional talent and the lengths to which society might go to nurture it. But for Lisa, the philosophical implications were secondary to the simple, overwhelming fact: her son was alive. Different than she might have imagined, shaped by forces beyond her control or understanding, but alive and extraordinary, and, in some essential way, still the boy who had loved the stars. When William returned to Earth 3 months later, he did something he had been planning throughout his time in orbit. He invited Lisa and Mark to Houston, to his apartment with its walls of space photographs, and added a new image to the collection, the Miller family portrait taken just weeks before Jake's disappearance. "I spent 20 years looking outward," he told them, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Now I'm also looking back, and forward, and inward. I'm mapping the constellation of my own life, with all its bright points and dark spaces." Lisa touched his cheek gently, a mother's gesture that bridged the decades of separation. "And what do you see when you look at that map?" William smiled, a smile that belonged neither to Jake Miller nor William Carter alone, but to the unique individual who had emerged from their convergence. "I see a journey no one could have predicted, and I see that it's far from over." As news of Dr. William Jacob Carter Miller's successful space mission spread around the world, his story became a symbol of hope for thousands of families still searching for missing children. If Jake Miller could disappear at a water park and return 20 years later as a NASA astronaut, perhaps other missing children might also be out there, living lives unimaginable to those they left behind. William established a foundation to support both search efforts for missing children and educational opportunities for disadvantaged youth with scientific aptitude, attempting to create legitimate pathways to the stars for children who, like him, dreamed of exploring beyond Earth's boundaries. The mystery of the Carters, who they were, where they had gone, whether they had been willing participants in Grayson's scheme or merely following orders, remained unsolved. But William had made peace with the likelihood that he might never have all the answers about his abduction and transformation. "Some stars are so distant that their light takes millions of years to reach us," he explained during a rare interview about his personal journey. "By the time we see them, they may have already changed or even died. My early memories are like that, distant light from events I may never fully understand. But that doesn't make them less real or less meaningful to who I am now." As William prepared for his next mission, this time to be part of the team establishing the first lunar habitat under the Artemis program, he carried with him 2 photographs, one of the Miller family standing before their Clearwater home, and one of the Earth rising above the lunar horizon, taken by the Apollo 8 astronauts more than 50 years earlier. Together, these images represented the extraordinary arc of his journey, from a curious child gazing upward at the night sky to a man who had transcended Earth's boundaries and was now helping humanity extend its reach even further. It was a journey made possible by both the best and worst of human intentions, by love and obsession, by loss and discovery. And as the lunar module descended toward the moon's surface with William aboard, the boy who disappeared from a water park and the astronaut he became finally merged into a single cohesive identity,
one defined not by what had been done to him, but by what he had chosen to do with the remarkable life he had been given. "Tranquility Base, this is Carter Miller," he transmitted as the module touched down on lunar soil. "The Prometheus has landed."
It was both an acknowledgement of his complex past and a reclamation of it, transforming the name of Grayson's misguided project into a symbol of humanity's enduring drive to explore, to understand, and to transcend its limitations. In that moment, William Jacob Carter Miller was neither victim nor experiment, but explorer and pioneer, writing the next chapter of his extraordinary story against the backdrop of the stars that had called to him since childhood. And somewhere in Clearwater, Florida, Lisa Miller stepped into her backyard and looked up at the sliver of moon visible in the evening sky, knowing that her son, lost and found in the most improbable way imaginable, was up there, fulfilling the destiny that had begun with a little boy's dreams and survived against all odds. "Look at you go, Jake," she whispered to the distant moon. "Look how far you've come."